So I'm going to talk about kind of the method to my madness, how I tried to work as an outsider with the school district in kind of 3 steps. And then Steve's going to say what happened. He was on the other side of it and what he thinks of it and how that all fits together. We've actually had some great discussions even last night about how do you work with a school system. It's more challenging than you think. And then the visual I kind of came up with was the school district is kind of like a big ship. And I'm a little outsider, so I'm like a tugboat. And if he's okay with it, I can come up and I can nudge him to the left a little bit. And as long as he's okay with it. And over time, over 8 years, that is a huge difference in trajectory. But if he ever changes his mind, goes hard red or right, nothing I can do about it. So it's a weird relationship in some ways. And what is the tugboat has a strong engine. My strong engine is the data that I can come up and try to convince people with it. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about later, is how you can make that data do something. Because if I'm going to talk to the Chamber of Commerce, I got to have numbers and dollars here. I can't just make half a dozen kid pictures. It's not going to work. So, and the people who are at that high level, they're having multi-million-dollar, $100 million budgets. They got to see numbers, and same with the school board. So this is kind of the method of the madness. And so in my master's program, there's a couple models, and everybody has me. What is the model? This is the model that I use to try to do what I do, not just school level, but on the community level. The change, and in the book, it's a great book actually. It's Just and Lasting Change When Communities Own Their Futures, and about having something that doesn't just happen for 3 years, and then when the leader goes away, it falls apart. It's got to be something that lasts, because you've probably seen that where some amazing PTO president comes in, it's great for a couple of years, but as soon as your kids age out, it falls apart. And so the thing is, it can't be one person, it's got to be a group of people. And it's a combination of bottom-up, teachers, PTO people. It's got to have top-down, so the leaders have to be engaged. We couldn't get anywhere without the superintendent and the board, honestly. We could get a little ways, but it's really hard to do without them. And you have to have some outsiders who can look at the data. My first official role was an outside data guy on the school's PEP grant. But there's usefulness to having those outsiders work with you and breaking down that note to let the outsiders into the school. But the second thing is you have to have your data, and you have to have your own data, actually. Because I can come home with studies about kids in Texas, and they're going to say, oh, those are Texans, they're weird, they're not Nebraskans. It's got to be your data, because you're going to believe your own data, and it's going to speak more to you when it's your data. And then you have to see what is in it for you. Everybody has to see value to this, and that was the strategy for how we did what we did. So first was getting their attention, and so I call that round 1. So we got a PEP grant that helped us pull in essentially all of our data for elementary schools. And I knew obesity was a problem because I saw it from my clinic, but did the schools know it? Well, we had to pull their data, and that was our first project. And once we got that, we had it. And this is one of the slides that I think got the most attention. This is the percentage of our kids that are both obese and overweight in per grade level. And out of 16,000 kids, that meant we had 2,000 obese kids. That wasn't just 2 or 3 of you. That wasn't just 10. That was 2,000 kids who were obese. And that's just obese, overweight, similar. And it got worse as they went through school. Those are one of those slides that took it from, is obesity a problem, to, yes, obesity is a problem. Okay, now what? Another interesting thing, we've talked a little bit, we touched on the socioeconomics a little bit. And this is one of the slides that surprised me the most. I did not expect this. I worked in a clinic that took care of half the Medicaid town, so I worked with low-income kids. What this slide is, this is the percentage of the kids in that school. This is every elementary school in Lincoln, Nebraska is a dot. And this was a slide we put together 6 years ago. This is the percent that are on free reduced cost lunch. We have schools in Lincoln that are 95% free reduced cost lunch back then. Actually, the economy's gotten better than we've had now. But we had, so we had really wealthy schools, we had really poor schools, and on that side, that's the percentage of the kids that are obese. And I knew there was some effect. I didn't know it was that strong an effect. It was huge. We had schools in elementary where 30% of the kids were obese just in elementary school already. And that surprised some people. I mean, we knew that it was bad, but we didn't know it was that bad in places. And when you went to those schools, you could see it. And I, of course, worked with those kids on positioning. This is actually a later slide that comes from the second line, but I think visually looks good. Here's another slide that looks very similar. Anyone want to guess what I'm tracking here, though? It's not obesity.
Academic scores?
Yeah, math. Same slide almost. Same data. And that's where this is much broader than just a walking track. That the same factors that lead kids to be more obese, less fit, also are some of the same factors that lead them to do worse on math scores, reading, everything else. And that kind of gave me some idea of how comprehensive this stuff was. The other slide is that we also track on fitness. There's a PACER test. Hopefully you guys do something like FitnessGram. That's kind of the gold standard these days in fitness testing. It's actually really good. I used to do cardiac stress testing for an adult who might have heart disease. It's actually almost as good. It's like a poor man's stress test. It's a good measure of the fitness of the kids. But the other thing is, from a long-term life expectancy, if you are both obese and not physically fit, that's chopping 5 to 10 years off of that kid's life. And that's thousands of kids who are going to have a life expectancy 5 to 10 years shorter, and we can do something about it. Okay? So that was one of the other hooks. So the first round was getting this data to get people's attention. And then we had that data ready when this new superintendent named Steve Joel showed up. And he's a data-driven guy and likes solutions. And if I don't think back, it was the perfect time. We had the right data when Steve showed up. The other thing is we presented this to the school board, and that school board member, Richard McGinnis, during that presentation said, well, that's K through 5. Could we get middle school? And I said, yeah, well, the data service will give us the data. And when he said that, data services gave us the data. So that's round 2. So thank you, Richard, for I couldn't have placed that question any better. But when the school board member says it, things tend to happen sometimes. And so next round, we were even better. We had K through 8 data. And that really made a big slide. We were at 20%, and it got worse, and it stayed worse. And then we also added more stuff to it, more richness to the data. We had, what were they in Title I versus Title I schools? In Title I schools, 30% of those kids were obese. And they stayed that way. And the middle school, the elementary schools got better for some reasons. That told us even more that we didn't know before, how big those disparities were. We got racial information. So Hispanic and Native American, huge percentage of kids are overweight and obese. And actually, we gave this data to other people. So we have a Hispanic community center, El Centro de las Americas. They can use this to track their own kids. And we've got a pretty significant Hispanic population. So for them, that's great information. That helped bring more partners in. And then we put in the academic scores I talked about earlier. That when I could start connecting this stuff to academic testing scores, now we're reaching big times. Now we're getting more attention. Now we don't have just the one school board. Now we have 6 school board members who think this is interesting. And we have business people who think this is interesting. So you do have to tie it back to math and reading and thinking science. And the fact that we can show this, and the evidence out there is getting stronger and stronger, that's a big deal. And also it's rich, poor, across ethnicities, boy, girl, it shows up consistently. And then we set some targets. We said, if we're going to do something, we want to actually try to do something. And some people call it something called a BHAG, or Big Hairy Audacious Goal. We wanted to get fit by 2015, get this number less than 15%, where we're basically about there. So we got there. And we also set fitness targets too, by the way. And that's going to be a big one. And then that times 5 years. Then that meeting with Steve helped us put Michelle's position. I can't tell you how much that helps having somebody lead the charge on the inside. But we couldn't have gotten the funding and the interest and the support to do that without the data in the first place. And then victories, we got the slide. We saw this stuff earlier. One other thing I like about what we've done is, this is a headline from Reuters about the obesity nationally, the wealthy kids are getting less obese, but the poor are not getting less obese. But we can say that that's not true in Lincoln. If we look at those and we break it down, this is the kids that are obese by rate. They're getting better if they're Hispanic, if they're multiracial, African American. Also in the fitness, we're seeing that the Hispanics are getting more fit, the African Americans are more fit. We've taken it everywhere. We don't just segregate one group. Everybody's getting better. And that's one of the things that I'm most proud about, is that we did it everywhere. I already showed you these slides, so I'll skip those. And so now we've got 2020 targets. We met the Healthy People 2020 goals, had a schedule. We actually want to double that. And fitness is probably going to be our next big thing we're going to focus on. We've got 80% of those kids passing that fitness test. And I already told you about that, so we'll skip to that, and then I'll finish with this slide, because it's one of my favorite ones lately. And we'll flip to Steve, and he's great off the cuff. And one thing I love about Steve is I think leadership is the one who describes the problem and says what they're going to do about it. And you'll hear lots of people who complain about why this can't happen. And in a large organization, that's a huge problem. And we talked about this even yesterday. So now I'll flip it over to Steve, who will make some comments, and then it's all Q&A from there.
Yeah, thank you. We want to spend ample time on any questions you might have on how you can be strategic in your district. How many of you are in school districts that have robust or active strategic plans with clearly delineated goals? How many have a goal for student achievement, graduation rate? Okay, hopefully everybody does. One of the tickets to this conversation is through that you can now, hopefully at the end of this conference, you can go back to your districts and talk with your superintendent, present to your school board, and you can tie in student success, student outcomes, to wellness. And it's a clear tie. It worked in Lincoln, it's worked in a lot of districts around the country. You're going to see more data and more information about that. It isn't easy work, because here's what superintendents have in the back of their mind. How many have attended a national conference? Okay. You go to a national conference and you get excited about something, and you're on the plane and you can't wait to tell people about it because you want to get it into people, right? I mean, honestly, I was talking with a school board member from Dilworth. I have certain school board members that when they go to national conferences, I have to be with them every step of the way, because they never met a new program that they wouldn't like to immediately bring back in. The difference between those that can be implemented and have a chance of being successful is you set the parameters on the front end of it. What are we trying to accomplish? What does the data tell us that we are trying to accomplish? How does it tie into our strategic objectives? How are we going to measure it? And then let's assume that it's very, very successful. How do we figure out a way to sustain it? And when Bob and I had that conversation, and he was preying on the new superintendent. So I mean, he's saying he's being nice about it, but I've always had an interest, as I mentioned before, with regard to physical fitness and health and wellness. But he brought the data in to show me the obesity rates. And then I was thinking, not in Lincoln, not in an all-American city where we're growing 1,000 students a year and businesses are relocating all the time and sports is such a big part of our culture. That can't be Lincoln. Well, it was Lincoln, and the numbers were bad. And we thought, as we were embarking on our strategic plan, our graduation rate, our student success rates, we're going to be contingent on the mental and physical wellness of our kids. And so Bob knew exactly how to hit that nerve with me, and then we talked about, okay, what do we do? I mean, what are the steps here? Well, he's a driver, as you know. I mean, you can clearly see in his presentation. He said, what if I could put some money together, some benefactors, some grants, to get a person who'd be our point person for this? And we gave it 2 or 3 years to see what happened. And if it was successful, would that be something that you would support in terms of staffing allocation? And I said, absolutely, if we could see the numbers. Now, going into it, I thought, that's a daunting task. When you get 30% of your kids that are obese, what are you going to do in 2 or 3 years? Even with a Michelle Welch, because I did say to Michelle Welch, you know, I'm going to commit to this, and I'll get our board to commit to this, but we have to have those results. Well, they went to work, they did a tremendous job, and of course the results were there. It was really easy for me, when our budget situation brightened a little bit, to go to our board and say, we're going to add a wellness position, and we have done that. Now, Michelle does have access to some resources, so the little bit of whining she was doing about she doesn't have a budget. She has some access. But anything that she's going to do, she's a one-person operation. And in a district of 40,000, that's a very, very difficult job. She works with our principals, she works with some of our staff champions. I know you've talked a lot about each building has a champion. They're all doing their own thing. I love going to the events, whether we're dedicating a walking track or they're celebrating how many pounds they've lost or whatever that event and activity is. I try to personally involve myself in it because it's such a great cause for celebration. So you're in smaller districts. What do you have to be asking yourself, what do you do? How do you bring that to scale or down to scale? And I would say this, if this is something that you're interested in, if you're a principal or a teacher leader, or you've got a principal that you think is interested, have this conversation, and then think about, look at your data, gather your data, and then think about what does that look like. Maybe it's release time. Maybe it's summer planning work. We call them extra stipends. Maybe it's somebody in the community that feels very, very passionate about this, that comes in on a regular basis and tries to work through this. But you have to make the sale, because most superintendents, they're not here today. Right? I wouldn't be here today if this was a conference in Lincoln, unless I was personally invited, because there's a million other things on our plate. But if you come to us and you say, you know that graduation goal? You know that student achievement goal? We have a strategy to get there, and here's what we're thinking about doing, and here's what our data would tell us. I have to believe that most, if not all, superintendents and boards of education would be very, very interested in that conversation. There are community resources out there. One of the things I've learned in Lincoln, but I learned it in Grand Island and Beatrice before that, and I started my career in a 250 student district and thought I hit the gold mine when I got to a 500 student district. There were people in communities that want to invest and support programs that make a difference in the lives of kids. We work with the greatest commodity that a community has to offer, and that's kids. And so whether people are thinking about retiring or they're thinking about bequeathing, one of the things that I've just seen tons and tons of evidence of, if you go to them with a great project, they'll fund it and support it. And in many cases, they're not looking for name notoriety. What they're looking for is just a chance to leave a legacy of having made a difference. Ed Koppel was 91, 92 years old. When I had my first wellness meeting with him, he was a member of the country club. I was starving. And when thankfully he ordered first, because I was going to get this Smearhopper with fries and extra sauces, and he ordered a poached egg because he was working out at 1 o'clock, 1:30 afternoon. 91 years of age, works out twice a day, still flies a plane, and has done well. And he said to me what Bob said to me. He said, if I'm going to fund this, I want to know how you're going to measure it. And he put some seed money into a few of our initiatives. You're going to have people like that in your communities, whether they're large or small. You can tap into them, but you have to have a plan. Remember this, in our business, we no longer can say, let's do something because it feels good, or let's do something because West Fargo is doing it. You have to be able to have a plan that ties directly into your kids. And man, can you celebrate when an obesity rate comes down, or a test score goes up, or a graduation rate goes up, or somebody's life is turned around. And when Bob shows that data of what is the cost to society about obesity, in 5 years off of a young person's life because they haven't taken care of themselves, all of a sudden you can change that culture of thinking. And I'm really proud to say that we have obesity on our staff. I think we're making some great inroads there. We sponsor some events and some activities for some staff members to get together. Every school's taking on a challenge. It's really, really great to see. So I'll stop there, and I think, Bob, unless you have anything else, we'll take some questions.
Well, one thing I was thinking is that, okay, what about other size districts? And I look across Nebraska, there's actually another district that's done better than us. You like to be first? There's a school, Kearney Public Schools, which is probably about the same size as Moorhead, I guess. Their outsider was a gal from the university whose kid was gaining weight because of the school snacks. That's what got Kate started. She partnered with the school on a pep grant. She was the outside data guy at the school, applied for a pep grant. That's how we started, actually. We started, Mary Bell was on the inside of the health and keep curriculum. I helped her on the pep grant. I was the outside data. That was the start of the data. There are, I think, 8 small districts in Nebraska that partner together with their ESU on a pep grant. That's creating that first set of data. If you don't have somebody to help you with that, partner with somebody from a university, a health department, crazy physician who wants to do this kind of stuff. So partnering with somebody outside and finding that first grant to get you kick-started. I think that was a key thing when I look at least in Nebraska, and I'm not sure what applies to you guys, but having that baseline data is huge because the field of public health is littered with well-intentioned interventions and nobody has a clue whether it worked or not because nobody measured it the whole time. How do you, when the grant runs out 3 years later, I think it helped, and I think, so because I'm not a hard data person, you got to be able to measure it so that you know that it worked. And if it doesn't work, frankly, you want to know about it as soon as possible because you don't want to keep doing it if it doesn't work. So that's everything. Other than that, I'm used to having this.
Any questions, anything that you can ask for us? How many have a relationship with their superintendent that maybe the school districts? How many think they could approach their superintendent with a plan? How many would need to bring in a couple of people? With maybe a board member or 2. Or the mayor, bring the mayor in. Questions?
How did you work this into your, the mandated wellness policy that all schools need to have? Did you work your plan into that policy too?
Help me out with that. I don't think we did. I don't know that we've changed. We have wellness guidelines. We have
I can speak to that.
encourage.
Okay, so we have this, fortunately for Steve, didn't do that part. So we have a new, like with the USDA new guidelines, we had a committee of people that were community members and all the things they require come together, and then we had established a thing called a wellness investigation that we were doing for our staff. And actually, you kind of saw that on the handouts that you have, where basically, how many of you have done Field Play 60? Anybody doing that? Okay. They have their wellness investigation. What we did is we melded our wellness investigation with their wellness investigation. So our schools that, because I always try to double dip. So our schools that are doing Field Play 60, by doing our wellness investigation, they are also doing their Field Play 60 investigation. And then I added a module, it was like a fourth module, because they have 3 modules in their investigation. I added a fourth module, which is all of the, kind of the information that you see on that, where you see our trending data. Because there were some things out of my sick curiosity that I really wanted to see, are we reading these things? And so it's kind of, when we very first started, there was way too much assessment going on because we were working with Alliance for a Healthier Generation because they were to the table early, but their assessment was really daunting to people. It was like a 32-page assessment, and you know, staff is maxed out, and it was like, wow, this is just way too big, and people cannot get their brain around it. And what I found is it was killing the mojo on the schools that were just getting started. It's like, hey, we're getting started. Here's a 32-page assessment to do, and they went wah wah and ran off. And so we modified it. We knew that schools were doing the healthier generation assessment, and then they were doing the field assessment. I was like, why aren't we reading these things together? And so we brought that together into that. So we're using their SWIs, we have a nationally based one, along with the pieces that we're moving for our cultural movement. And then I have worked with our data assessment people at the district, and this is my first year, now in year 5, where now they have things set up into their system, so then it gives me all my reports, and they have an action plan that's tied right there. And so that was kind of how we got to that place, that then by next year, we'll really have measurable action plan steps on all those pieces. But again, smart development, if you're kind of at those places and you're saying, well, what's our assessment tool look like? If there's a place that gives you funding, especially when you're getting started, it makes total sense, and it's a nationally based, so you're not just, you know, conjuring this thing up in the back room. Having that piece really, I think, kind of lends credence to what we're doing for our investigation. But we went from a 32-page assessment to a 5-page assessment. And now I have it set up where it toggles, if they aren't doing Field Play 60, they really just have maybe 40 questions that they answer. And so again, I'm looking at the threshold, but I'm trying to get schools started. I just recognize this. People might be very passionate, but not passionate about paperwork. And so everything I can do to clean line our paperwork piece so that it gives us the measurability for USDA for regulation without causing problems on the other side of it has really been powerful. Does that make sense?
Because we're relooking at our wellness policy, and that part that I'm stuck on is the monitoring and assessment and evaluation.
Well, and again, without sounding funny saying this, it's like all my stuff is open source. That's kind of one of the neat things I love about being part of the school system. When I did corporate wellness, and everything I built had to be very protected because it was what we sold to businesses. And it's just so lovely to be able to share that with people, and you guys can look at, well, what's the wellness investigation look like at LPS? Well, it looks like the first 3 months, it looks like the modules of Field Play 60, which you also have available to you for free, and then just some questions that you're asking, like, you know, I wanted to see, well, how many break breaks are happening in schools? Well, how many people are using candy rewards in the classrooms? And so some of those cultural things were the pieces that I felt were going to be really impactful. And we were looking at, we have over 1,400 kids with food allergies to 120 different foods. And so that adds some, that really has changed the birthday cupcake world for us. And it's not really, it is wellness, but it's not, because it's more about health and health office and those folks. And so, looking at giving each school a chance within that format to say, okay, which of these pieces do we need to move? And that's how that's tied in, because then we choose one of those items that are on that list to be able to have be their action plan step. And it makes it measurable.
So are you using all mostly school level folks, right? Is that correct?
Are you any of your teachers in classrooms?
Yeah. I want to say something about the Prescott Elementary video we showed. That was a great video. That's a great school. Michelle and I can take no credit for that.
Absolutely.
That was happening before we showed up, actually. Okay? There's one of my favorite things in public health, they call it positive deviance. Deviant in a good way. And one of the things that data helps you do is it helps you find who those people are that are doing crazy awesome stuff that has nothing to do with you. So we use that as a promotional video They did it before us, actually. Prescott was doing that before us. The reason I found out about Prescott, I didn't know, that's in another area of town, I didn't know anything about Prescott. This is Prescott Elementary School.
So explain to them what that means.
So what
about
this means-
Scattergrass are confusing.
Okay, so what happens is you predict, if I could, well, how I created this graph is I was looking at, I could actually guess pretty much what a school's obesity rates by looking at their poverty rate, essentially. And what that means is, if a school with 70% free reduced cost, had 70% free reduced cost lunch, you could guess they're most likely to have an obesity rate around 20%. So that's what you would expect when you adjust for that. But Prescott's was 15. That's something great is happening there. They're doing something there. Because their neighborhood wouldn't predict those kids would be much healthier than you'd expect for a poor neighborhood. And so that's when I actually saw that, and I looked at it and thought, what the heck's going on? And for several years they were like that. So it wasn't just a fluke. And so that's why we went to Prescott. And I think, were you there when we started?
Yeah.
We were like, oh, what's going on? So we actually went and we talked to Ruth Ann Wiley. That was her
Yeah,
principal.
we interviewed their wellness
We
committee and
found out
said,
what they were
what's going
doing.
on?
Right.
Why is
They're
this
80,
awesome?
they're 80+% free and reduced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not just, it's amazing. And so we said to them, tell us what you're doing that is working. And because we didn't have yet this assessment piece, to be able to say, oh, okay, well, we can look at this and kind of correlate that. And we have the same thing for fitness, but what we also did, sorry, I'm jumping in here, but you'll notice this poor guy at the very top up here, where their kids are way off the chart. What we very purposely didn't do was, A, publish who what school is, so that then it makes these poor guys, it's like one more place where it looks like they're failing, okay? We focused on the positive and did these bright spots. Actually, Bob paid for those to be made through his grant funds. But we said, tell us about what's going on. And then as time went on, we also have one I'll show actually later today, about hopefully, I got working. But for Leffler, that's doing the same thing.
Well, and that was the other funny thing, is that we found Leffler the same way. We looked at their fitness scores. One school had really great fitness testing. And it was the one 3 blocks from my house that my daughters went to, and I didn't realize it. I pulled the data, I'm like, who is this? Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, it's Leffler, where my kids go to school. And we actually went and talked to their PE teachers. What are you doing that the other people aren't doing? They were actually they turned that pacer test into a game. They rolled the dice and the kids would run it. They do a personal best approach. They were doing stuff on their own that we had nothing to do with. And so part of our role, that's where I go back to that bottom up, because sometimes the bottom up people already know how to do it. You don't need some expert from Harvard to tell you how to do it. If they're already doing it right, they know their school and their situation better than anybody from the outside would know. And they can tell the story better, and that's why we create those videos, because frankly, Ruth Ann speaking to another principal means more than me speaking to another principal. A PE teacher speaking to another PE teacher, and so we interviewed the PE teachers at Leffler, and that's what she'll show you. And so I think on the school level, so I think sometimes we're worried that this is big honking district, yeah, the LPS can do that because you got all these resources. Actually, a lot of the stuff that happened, we copied from our own folks who already figured it out before we even showed up. And so I think of it that way, that on a school level, you can make that big a difference with just an engaged principal and a PTO president, actually. The stuff that happened at Prescott that started, and it was that leadership. They had an AmeriCorps person, they had a good CLC person, and they just had that critical mass of folks.
And they had people that got how to write effective grants. I mean, having anybody, whoever in your district is the grant writer person, or if you want to learn more about grant, I never used to be a grant writer, and I just attended some seminars and learned how to do it. And, now I can get lots of things funded, but it's just, having those people that able to kind of get you started, that can kind of fill your gaps. And I think, especially in small towns, you really want to think, if you're thinking about community resources, think, when I was in a town of 7,500 people, it was the extension agent in town, it was the public health folks, it was the Chamber of Commerce, it was myself, because I was at the hospital, and it's all about the personality, and you all know that. So, if you've got a rock star in public health that really is passionate about, a piece of it, then support that person. And that's the thing, we needed the board and Steve to make things happen, but what we really needed to do was just get all the people that are living the life together around tables and say, let's talk about how this is going. Hey, let's highlight a school. And my feeling is we always focus on the positive. We are not looking to drag schools through. We've had a lot of discussion about that when it very first started. Well, when do you publish this information? When do you publish this? How does this, what's the transparency piece? How do you have parents looking at this? And we found it was much more powerful to highlight the positive but then get all these schools around the table, telling those little things that they're doing that are successful, and having schools steal from each other.
Do you send fitnessgram data home to parents?
It has been mixed, it's been kind of an evolution, really. It's all about our.
Okay, well, yeah, well, that's its own story. I didn't know anything about fitness training. And until I met Mary Bell with the Health P curriculum, he says, yeah, we do that, we send it home with the kids every year. And I said, really? And I went home and I asked my oldest daughter, Robin, hey, do you take this test? Oh yeah, it's up in my desk. She never took it to me, the parents never saw it a lot of times. And so although it was being sent out, it never went anywhere, nothing happened because of it. And I hate to say it, the fitnessgram, the way it's presented, it's not in the best format that the average person can understand. It's written at too high an academic level. The district in Kearney that's doing an awesome job, they actually are sending out to parents a report on their obesity screening results. But they made it very simple, and they color-coded it. And Kate was telling me that people will come in and they just say, my kid's red. They don't understand what a BMI percentile is. So she has done a great job of turning it into a report that the average person can understand, because the average literacy rate, I think, is around 8th grade, and in these low-income, it might be 6th grade. It has to be a report that's very easy to understand. Now, the problem is we honestly have not gone there yet, studying these direct reports. I want to get there, but it might be a year or two. You've probably seen in the media where that's gone horribly wrong, where the quote fat letter gets misdirected. You got to be really careful if you do it. Do it right. There are good examples out there, but